They're in red. Yellow denotes Russia. Now, Russia plays a big part in Bible prophecy. And just fine, the tiny nation of Israel, it's in green. The Bible foretells of 3 prophetic wars that are coming soon, which I believe will absolutely end Islam as a viable religion in the end times. The first, end time war, which strikes at the geographical heart of Islam, is the Psalm 83 war. It's a war in which Israel will have to deal with its hostile bordering neighbors, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, and Jordan. This continuous status quo of Israel and these nations constantly getting into skirmishes cannot last much longer. Israel needs to do something about being constantly lived under threat of missile attack. And according to Psalm 83, when this prophecy is fulfilled, Israel will control those border nations and gain a brief peace. The following is what the Islamic map will look like after the Psalm 83 war. The second war, which follows, is found in Ezekiel 38 and 39. The Gog-Magog war is one of the best described prophetic wars in all of the Bible, covering 2 whole chapters. This exciting war will be a major world changer. The Gog-Magog war foretells how Russia, Iran, Turkey, all those stand nations, Libya, and the other countries that form an outer ring of Islamic nations will war against Israel. Israel appears undefeatable after the Psalm 83 war, and so all of those nations combine into a coalition in order to make an attempt to plunder and destroy Israel. Well, what happens? These hordes, these unconquerable armies, well, Israel has no chance of standing up against them. They're doomed. But no, the Bible says that God will make his appearance back on the earth. Not physically, but he himself personally annihilates the invading hordes. So there's no denying God's behind this divine rescue. God intervenes using biblical types of judgment, such as fire and brimstone, making the armies turn on each other and being decimated by earthquakes. God even rains down fire on the homelands of these invading nations. The entire coalition of Islamic armies, along with Russia, are almost utterly destroyed. And so the Islamic map of the world after the Gog and Magog war will then look like this. The third prophetic end-time war should hammer the nail in the coffin of Islam. Revelation describes the horrific time period coming called the tribulation. It's a 7-year time period where God will pour out his wrath on the earth. God's judgments will happen while the Antichrist rules as a global dictator. How does the Antichrist rise to power out of the European Union, as Daniel 9 indicates? Probably because Russia and the Middle East are no longer world players, thanks to God's crushing hand during the Gog and Magog war. And since the United States sat out of the Gog and Magog war, that shows a weakening in the West, likely due to the rapture or financial collapse. That leaves a power vacuum in the world, and there's the revived Roman Empire right there, waiting to fill the power vacuum, just as Daniel prophesied. We read in the Bible that in the tribulation there will be 4 religions. We know there will be Christianity, made up of those tribulation saints who accepted Christ after the rapture. Then there's Judaism. The Antichrist spends much of his time persecuting tribulation saints and Jews. Then there is what's called the harlot religion. She's a conglomeration of world religions that rides on the back of the Antichrist, so to speak. She seems in charge, but the Antichrist is really just using her for his own end. True to form, halfway through the tribulation, the Antichrist gets rid of all competing religions, and he sets himself up solely to be worshipped. Surprisingly, considering Islam's might in the world today, there is no mention of Islam during the tribulation. For a religion that's based on having to destroy one's enemies for Allah's honor, and then Allah loses every single last day war big time, I believe these end time wars are going to gut Islam before the tribulation begins. And that leaves us with the third and final war that should end Islam, called the Conventional War of Revelation 6. That chapter reveals that the Antichrist, after he assumes power, begins annihilating a quarter of the world's population. Folks, that's 1.5 billion people in today's number. Now, if you can't have any other religion competing with you, especially a militaristic religion like Islam, which demands there are no other religions beside itself, what do you do with it? You have to annihilate it. The biggest populations of Muslims in the world, most don't realize, live in Indonesia and Bangladesh and other eastern nations outside of the Middle East. So, more than likely, the Antichrist is going to be spending the beginning of his reign annihilating Islam, so there's no competitor to setting himself up as the true global leader. How tragic that 1.5 billion people will die from the Antichrist conventional war. But after that war, the Islamic map will look like the following. Looking at these 3 biblical end-time wars, I can only conclude that Islam doesn't have much of a future left to it, because the end-time signs are pointing to the soon return of Jesus Christ. A Psalm 83 war could break out at any moment, along with the destruction of Damascus, as prophesied in Isaiah 17. These world-shaking events could literally occur at any minute. The Gog and Magog alliance of the nations already exists. Europe is so fragile that they're ready for a strong leader to take over. Everything has lined up and is in place. And so, according to the Bible, Islam has very little time left to it.